Okay, this week in CIST 1602, we're going to talk about information security policies. In this chapter, you're going to um, be introduced to the concept of information security policies. You'll learn about 3 different types of information security policies: the enterprise information security policy, issue-specific security policy, and also systems-specific security policy. Also, we'll look at elements of effective policy implementations as we go through the chapter as well. So when we go through this chapter, after you finish this, you should be able to define information security policy and discuss its central role in a successful information security program. You'll be able to list and describe 3 major types of information security policy and also the major components of each of those. You'll also be able to explain what is necessary to implement an effective policy and what consequences the organization may face if it does not. You'll also be able to discuss the process of developing, implementing, and maintaining various types of information security policies. So we're first talking about why do we have a policy. All right, first of all, our information security policy is going to act as an outline for acceptable behavior and use of information. All right, so the policy is going to be designed to create a productive and effective work environment. It's going to be an essential foundation for the effective information security policy program. So our quality information security program begins and ends with policy. All right, so think of it once again, it's the rules that govern an organization. Some basic rules that must be followed when shaping a policy. Policy should never conflict with law. Your policy must be able to stand up in court if challenged. And your policy must be properly supported and administrated. Now, these guidelines will help with formulated IT policy, as well as your IT UFOSEC policy as well. So all policies must contribute to the success of an organization. Management must ensure that adequate sharing of responsibility for proper use of information systems. And end users of information systems should be involved in the steps in policy formation. Okay, so you want to get the input from the people that are going to be actually using the information, make sure that the policy is something that works. So now we're going to look at a bullseye model. This is for prioritizing complex changes. So we got 4 different layers of the model. We have policies, networks, systems, and applications. Policies are your first layer of defense. So once again, this is the rules. Our networks, that's the threats first meet the organization's network. So that's where the threats coming in, that's the first place they're going to come in is through the network. Systems will be your computers and manufacturing systems. And then applications are all applications systems. So the role of policy is protecting the organization and its employees. It's done by establishing acceptable use and allowed behavior. So policy is the set of organizational guidelines that dictate certain behavior within the organization. It's a defined plan or course of action. That's intended to influence and determine decisions, actions, and other matters. Keep in mind that policy represents the formal statement of the organization's managerial philosophy. So think of it, once again, it's a set of rules that determine what behavior is acceptable and unacceptable within the organization. Policies should also, they must be defined, and they must define what penalties exist for unacceptable behavior, as well as an appeals process. A standard is a detailed statement of what must be done in order to comply within a policy. So think of it as the rules govern the policy compliance. The practices, procedures, guidelines, they determine how employees are to comply with a policy. So we look at these guidelines and non-mandatory recommendations the employees may use as a reference in complying with the policy. Procedures are step-by-step instructions designed to assist employees in following policies, standards, and guidelines. And practices are examples of actions that illustrate compliance within policies. Think of these as policies of what you can and cannot do. The other ones are how you do those. How do you stay within the policy using the standards, the guidelines, procedures, and practices. So we see this in the chart, how these are broken down. We have policies are sanctioned by management. Standards are detailed minimal specifics for compliance. Guidelines are recommendations for compliance. And then procedures. Those are step-by-step instructions for compliance. Now, one thing with policies, they're going to require constant modification and maintenance. Times change, items, situations come up, policies are going to have to be reworked. I do recommend that when you do have a policy change, you take that opportunity to train the entire organization on the policy. Take that opportunity as a training opportunity. Policies are only good as they are used to train employees. You can have the greatest policy in the world, but if you put it in a drawer and nobody ever sees it, your employees are not going to follow that security policy. So you want to make sure that you train or schedule training for the employees that own the policy. So we got three different types of information security policies we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about enterprise information security policy, issue specific, and then system specific policies. All right, the first one we're going to talk about is enterprise information security policy. That's a policy that sets the strategic direction, scope, and tone for all of the organization's security efforts. Now, this must support an organization's vision and mission statements. And you also want to make sure that it does not typically require frequent or routine modification unless the strategic direction of the organization changes. So think of this also as it's also known as security program policy, the general security policy, IT security policy. You also hear it referred to as the high level InfoSec policy, or maybe just the InfoSec policy. So the enterprise information security policy assigns responsibility for the various areas of InfoSec. And that also includes the maintenance of the policies and the practices and the responsibility of end users. So think of it as it guides the development, implementation, and management requirements of the InfoSec program. So to integrate an organization's mission and objectives into the enterprise, keep in mind that the enterprise information security policy should not contradict the organization's organizational mission statement. But it's also prudent for an institution to have policies that govern such access and also ensure that access does not interfere or create a hostile work environment for other employees. Some of the elements of an enterprise information security policy include an overview of the corporate philosophy on security, information on the structure of the InfoSec organization and individuals who fill the InfoSec role, a fully articulated responsibility for security that is shared by all members of the organization, and also a fully articulated responsibilities for security that are unique to each role within the organization. So we look at the components of an enterprise information security policy. Well, first we'll start off with purpose. That's what is this policy for? What is the mission of this? In this, the document is going to identify the elements. You will identify the elements of a good security policy, explain the need for information security. You'll specify the various categories of information security, identify the information security responsibility and roles, and identify the appropriate levels of security through your standards and guidelines. All right, the elements that define the whole topic of information security within the organization, as well as its critical components. As the example given here, the policy may state protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information while in processing, transmission, storage through the use of policy, education, training, and technology. Okay, then you would identify where and how the elements are used. So there's, for example, that would tell you how to apply the Macomber cube to your policy. All right, the need, that justifies the need for the organization to have a program for information security. Roles and responsibilities are going to define the staffing structure. It's designed to support InfoSec within the organization, and then lay out their InfoSec responsibilities and roles. And then references are going to list any other standards that influence or are influenced by this policy, including any federal, state laws, or other policies that are relevant. All right, so now we're going to talk about issue-specific security policy. All right, so this is a policy that provides a detailed, targeted guidance to instruct all members of the organization in the use of resources. The issue-specific policy should begin by introducing an organization's fundamental resource use philosophy, and also that the ISSP will typically include more detail than higher level policy documents. So, excuse me, this is not to provide the foundation. This is not to establish foundation for administrative enforcement or legal prosecution, okay, but it's there to provide a common understanding of the purpose which an employee can and cannot use a resource. So an effective ISSP should accomplish the following. So it should explain how technology should be used, how the technology is controlled. It should finally identify the organization against a liability for an employee's inappropriate or illegal use of the system. Now, every ISSP should have these three features. It addresses specific technology-based resources. It requires frequent updates. And it also contains a statement explaining the organization's position on a particular issue. So some of the topics that might be covered in an issue-specific security policy could include the use of email, instant messaging, other electronic communications, the use of the internet, bring your own equipment, personal technology, how you use it during work. All of these different items should be included in the ISSP. The elements of an ISSP, it should begin with a clear statement of purpose that outlines the scope and the applicability of the policy. And I'll define the technology is going to be addressed. So then it would have the authorized user section, or authorized use section. So it outlines who can use the technology covered under the policy and for what purpose. Then we'll have a prohibited use of equipment. As you see some of the examples here, criminal use should be prohibited, offensive or harassing material, copyrighted, other restrictions depending on your company. So this is telling the user what is allowed and what is not allowed in the policy. The system management section, this can be described as pertaining to users' relationships to system management and can cover proper use of email, electronic documents, as well as the storage of documents, your virus protection, physical security, encryptions. And then you should have a section for the violation of the policy, have a procedure for reporting violations set up, and also a penalties for violations. So you have it defined in your policy what actions will be taken resulting of the violation of the policy. Then you'll have a policy review and modifications. That should be, that's involve the timetable and procedures for a periodic review. Then the limitations and liability section, that's the organization's liability and providing a set of disclaimers will be in this section. Now, when you implement the ISSP, the three most common approaches for creating and managing the ISSP are to create a number of independent ISSP documents, and each of those will be tailored to a specific issue. Or you can create a comprehensive ISSP document that covers all the issues, or you can create a modular ISSP document, and from that it's going to unify policy creation and administration while also maintaining each specific issue's requirement. That's the recommended approach because it's going to provide a balance between issue orientation and policy management. So we'll look at the different approaches here. So we have the individual policy. Advantage of this, clear assignments to responsible departments. It's written by those with superior subject matter and expertise for the technology's specific systems. Disadvantages of the individual policy is it typically yields a scattershot result that fails to cover all of the necessary issues. It can suffer from poor policy dissemination, enforcement, and review. The comprehensive policy, the advantages are it's well controlled by centrally managed procedures, ensuring complete topic coverage. It often provides better formal procedures than when the policies are individually formatted. And it usually identifies processes for dissemination, enforcement, and review. The disadvantages of this is it may overgeneralize issues and skip over vulnerabilities, and it may be written by those with less complete subject matter expertise. So now we look at the modular policy. So this is when it's often considered an optimal balance between the individual and the comprehensive. You have the well-controlled central management procedures that assure the complete topic coverage, but you have the clear assignments to responsible departments in here as well, and it is written by those with superior subject matter expertise. The downside of this, the disadvantage is it may be more expensive than other alternatives, and it can be difficult to manage when you go to implement this. One thing about a modular policy that makes it more suited for revision, in here the revised sections can be compared to previous versions of a specific module. So it requires less tracking than the use of multiple separate documents. Okay, next we're going to move into system-specific security policy. These are similar to a set of standards or procedures that must be followed when dealing with a specific system. So think of this as the organizational policies that often function as standards or procedures to be used or configured when configuring or managing systems. With this, you got two separate groups that can make up a system specific. You have managerial guidance and technical specifications, or they could have those also be combined into a single system specific security policy document. First, we'll talk about managerial guidance. So the managerial guidance CIST document is created by management to guide implementation of new hardware and also to address employee behavior. So this is created by the management, applies to any technology that affects the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information. So that must be evaluated using the CIST system-specific security policy. This is something also that keep in mind that the issue-specific and the system-specific may develop both of these at the same time. The organizations may develop these at the same time. The technical specifications, CIST system-specific security policy. All right, so a system administrator might need to create a different policy in order to implement a managerial policy. Maybe something with just simple as passwords. They may have a different policy for managerial. So we got two general methods for implementing technical controls. You have access control list and configuration rules. Access controls, the access control list, that is a list that allows or denies access based on authentication or types of network traffic. A couple things in access controls. This includes the user access list, the matrix, the capability tables govern the rights and the privileges. The capability table specifies which subjects and objects that a user or group can access. These specifications are frequently complex matrix rather than a simple list or tables. So think of it as ACLs enable administrators to restrict access according to the user, computer time, date, or duration, or even a particular file. You can be given permissions on individual files. So the ACLs regulate who can use the system, what authorized users can access, when they can access the system, where authorized users can access the system from, and also how authorized users can access the system. So some common features, user privileges. These will also be known as permissions, include read, write, execute, or delete. So we see a look at a local security policy set in here. Using the policy, they can set permissions for users. We also have here a local user groups and groups. So you can come in and set permissions for these users through your ACL. Now we'll look at a user group ACL for Linux. So in here we have the Linux Ubuntu system logged in as user, as ID user mouse. So this ID command is going to show us what groups the mouse is in. All right, so we're looking in ID mouse, shows us the groups located here. This get the FACL command that shows the files access control list. So we're looking here at rodent files. So we see the files, rodent files, the owner's rat, group is rodents. In here, we're seeing that they are given the privileges of read, write, and execute, and that all members of the rodent group had these privileges as well, but everyone else can only read or execute files in the directory. Now, looking at this, we can see that mouse is a member of the rodents group. So configuration rules are instructional codes that guide the execution of the system when information is passing through it. This is such as like a firewall rules you can set. You can set different rules for IP addresses. You can also set those rules for users and groups, giving them permission of what they can and can't do. Rule policies are more specific to the operation of the systems than ACLs. And they may not deal with the users directly. So some security systems require specific configuration scripts that will tell the system what actions perform on each set of information they possess as they process. So for issue here, we're looking at a Palo Alto firewall configuration rules. A BitTorrent application is automatically dropped. So looking at these, first let's look at what we're looking at up at the top. So we have source, it's a packet from, destination is packet to. So where's the information coming from and where's it going to? That's our source and destination. The zone is part of the origin or destination of the packet. The IP address, or address is the IP address. User is predefined user groups. Action is going to specify whether the packet from that source is allowed to go through or it is dropped. So you'll see allow and deny. So once again, we go back to rules 16 and 17. We say that those are denied, okay, as they're coming through the application of the BitTorrent. Rule 22, that ensures that any user in the internal network, the L3 trust is able to access any external website. So we see there that web browsing, SSL, they are allowed through this. All right, so many organizations may create a single document to combine both elements of the management guidance and technical specifications for the system specific. This may be a confusing document to the user of the policies, but it is practical to have the guidance from both perspectives in a single place. It should also make sure the document is carefully articulated and it has the required actions for each procedure described. So we're going to look at the guidelines for effective policy development and implementation. So a couple things about a policy. To make a policy effective and legally defensible, the policy must properly be developed using industry accepted practices, and it must be formally approved by the management. It must be distributed using all appropriate methods, read by all employees, understood by all employees, formally agreed to by an act or affirmation. So the employees must say that they've read and understand it, kind of like with the syllabus that you did at the beginning of the semester. Okay, the syllabus was the policy for the class. You read the policy, you took a quiz saying that you agreed to the policy, that you understood the syllabus and you agreed to it. And the syllabus or the policy must be uniformly applied and enforced. You can't pick and choose who to apply the policy to. Now, the benefits of viewing the development process of InfoSec policy, we'll look at this in 3 different parts. We'll look at the consisting of the design and writing, policy approval, and the management process for distributing the policy through the organization. All right, so the benefits of this: the policy designed and written, or maybe redesigned and rewritten. After that, a senior manager or executive at the appropriate level of and the organization's legal counsel review and formally approves the document. After that, the management will process. The management processes are established, and then the policy is sent through the organization. So we'll look at this. We'll look at policy distribution. One way it may be distributed is a hard copy distribution, or it could be emailed or electronically distributed. Maybe a policy that's put on an internal document or internal website, internal storage. It may be one that has formal training. Keep in mind, though, that unless the organization can prove that the policy actually reached its end users, it cannot be enforced. So you want to make sure that the policy is given to the users, and that you have something back saying that from the user that they have received and read the policy. Now, distribution of classified policies will also require additional levels of control. So maybe the labeling of the document, the collection and destruction of older versions to ensure that confidentiality of the information contained within the policy, the documents themselves. Policies can give an attacker a threat, an insight into the way the organization operates. So you want to make sure that older policies are retrieved and properly destroyed. So there are some barriers to employees reading policies. This can arise from literacy or language issues. If you have an employee that is literacy challenged or visually impaired, they may require additional assistance. Maybe through audio or larger type versions of the document. If you have a multinational organization, you also have to deal with the challenges of gauging reading levels and language translations for foreign citizens. You may have to translate that document, that policy, into several different languages. So with policy comprehension, to ensure that employees will understand the policy and make sure that you know that jargon and technical terms should be kept to a minimum to ensure the comprehension. It must be written at a reasonable reading level. You want to use some kind of form of assessment to gauge how well employees understood the policy's underlying issues. Maybe a quiz or some other form of exam. So you can look and see how the employees understood the policy. You may have a minimum score that they have to maintain. If they don't, they may require additional training and awareness efforts before that policy can be enforced. So policy compliance, that means that an employee must agree to a policy, and whether it's through an electronic means, a signed document, the employee performs the actions, some way that they're going to demonstrate that they have read the policy and they are going to comply with the policy. Now you have to ask yourself, what happens if an employer, refuses to agree to comply with the policy, or that's basically the employees refusing to work and can be grounds for termination. Think of it as a kind of similar to the license agreement. All right, so this sample end user license agreement, the terms of service. If you're installing a video game, for example, and you decide that you don't agree to the terms of service, the software will not allow you to use the game. Same with the setups on this. You either have the option to, I agree to the TOS, the license agreement, or you can cancel the installation. Same thing with the policy. If the employee refuses to sign the policy, they are removed from the employment. It's grounds for termination. Now, policy enforcement can be, a policy can be enforced either through punishment-based or reward-based systems. Now, this is the final component of the design implementation. You want to make sure that your effective policy is uniform and impartial enforcement. So in here, keep in mind though that it does have to be uniform. It does have to apply to all. As you see the example on the screen, it says if an employee is punished, censored, or dismissed as a result or refusal to follow policies, and then they're able to demonstrate that the policies were not uniformly applied or enforced, the organization may find itself facing punitive as well as compensatory damages. So policies, they have the consequences for not following the policy written out. Those have to be enforced, and it has to be applied to everyone. All right, so the policy development and implementation using the SDLC, the Systems Development Lifecycle. So we know that a policy or redevelopment project should be well planned, properly funded, aggressively managed, and you'll make sure that it's competitive, it's completed on time and within budget. So the policy development team, they should be able to obtain support from senior management, support from active involvement of IT management, have clear articulation or goals, participation of the correct individuals, and also a detailed outline of the scope of the policy development. Now, going back to the correct individuals, these are for people that's got interest into the policy. They're going to be affected by the policy. So you want to make sure that you have legal, human resources, and user representatives all involved with the policy. You would assign a project champion. That's somebody that's going to oversee and push the policy, and acquire a capable project manager, someone that's going to actually oversee the creation of the policy. The analysis phase, this should include a new or recent risk assessment or IT audit that will document the current InfoSec needs of the organization. And also you want to gather key reference materials, including any existing policies. Then you move on to the design phase, where you'll draft the actual policy document. This is something that can be done with a committee. It's commonly going to be done by a single author with input for the committee, or input from the stakeholders. There are a number of references and resources available on the web. SANS has copies of sample policies that you can look at. So after the policy is written, the design team or committee is going to review the preliminary policy, and then they're going to make any recommendations. Once everything's done, the document is approved by the committee. It's going to go to the executive or approving manager for a sign off on this. Then we go to the implementation phase. So that's where the team creates a plan to distribute the policy, make sure it is read, understood, and agreed to by those that it's going to apply to. And so the simplest way is to have an acknowledgement, put a cover sheet, let's have a place for the employee to sign, saying that I have received, read, and understood and agreed to this policy. And that's going to provide the paper trail that the employee has read and understood the policy. So we go into the maintenance phase. This is the phase where the policy is monitored, maintained, and modified as needed. The policy should also have the built-in mechanisms where the users can report any problems with the policy, preferably something they can report anonymously, and also have a periodic review should be built into the process as well. Once changes are made to this policy, you also want to then redistribute, retrain on any major issues that you've seen, any changes. Make sure that the employees are aware of any updates in the policy. There are some policy management software, such as Compliance Shield by Information Shield, we will look at. So we have our policies written. We will have ways to, it's written, it's approved, it's been published, users have signed off on it. So in there we have a way that we can support our policy. So we look at Compliance Shield. All right, so in this screenshot, we're seeing that it does have the policy library. Policies are located here. This one, for example, is for Kennesaw State University. Our consolidated holdings, it's a case simulation for Kennesaw State University. So in here, they will have the different policies that users will be able to go in and view those policies. You'll see the dates that it was updated, and then the actions that can be performed in this. So it's a way to distribute the policy to our users. Now there are other ways that steps we can take to develop a policy, other approaches. We have a information security policies made easy approach by Woods. We have SP 800-18 Revised 1 Guide for Developing Security Plans for Federal Information Systems. So that describes a business process centered approach to policy management. Couple things also about administrating policy. You want to have a champion and a manager, just like you did for information systems or InfoSec projects. We've talked about this policy champions positions combined with the manager's positions called the policy administrator. This is somebody that's got enough clout in the organization to encourage management to get behind the policy. So, and the policy administrator, that's the person that's going to be usually responsible for the creation, revision, distribution, and storage of the policy. You want to make sure that you have a proper review schedule, which this is used to keep policies current. This is something that should occur on a yearly basis. Once again, if changes are made, then training is going to be necessary for the end users, or for everybody in the organization. So to facilitate policy reviews, the policy administrator should implement a mechanism which individuals can easily make recommendations for revisions to the policies and other related documents. This may include email, office mail, maybe an anonymous drop box. So then the policy comes up for review. All comments should be examined and management approved changes should be implemented. It's important to have a timestamp on a policy. That way the users do not use an out-of-date policy, or they're not complying with the out-of-date policy. Also, you may have a sunset clause. That means that it's only for a short-term association with a second-party business or agency. It's when the policy ends. That's when it's normally used, is for some kind of short-term association. All right, some final notes on policies. The use of policies intended to improve employee productivity and also inform employees of acceptable and unacceptable behavior. One of the additional benefits of proper policy usage is to the avoidance of litigation in the event of an employee termination. So it's really policies there to train your employees. It's to tell them what they can do and what they can't do. Employees generally want to do what's right. It's important, though, to train your employees on the policy, that you give them guidance for what they can and can't do. So there's three general causes of unethical and illegal behavior: either ignorance of a policy, an accident, or intent. So ignorance of a policy is they didn't know. An accident is something happens, they accidentally click on a link. Maybe something that's computer related, as far as software or files, are intent, where they intended to do this. So whatever the cause of illegal, immoral, or unethical behavior, keep in mind that one thing is certain: information security personnel must do everything in their power to deter these acts and to use policy, education, and training and technology to protect the information and the systems. Keep in mind that laws, policies, and their associated penalties only provide deterrence if these three conditions are present: the fear of the penalty, the probability of being apprehended, and the probability of the penalty being applied. So by knowing what is prohibited, what the penalties are, and how the penalties will be enforced, that is a preventive measure that's going to let the employees now focus on the business at hand instead of worrying about, is this ethical? Is this right? They have it written out for them. So that's the end of chapter 4. As we discussed, information security policies.